11:47 at night, March 14th, 1944. Bavaria, Germany. Private First Class James Thorson crouched in frozen mud behind the administrative building of Stalag Via Moosburg, gripping his grandfather's hand-forged Viking throwing axe. 9 German sentries patrolled the compound perimeter, armed, alert. Professional soldiers who expected nothing unusual on this cold March night. In the next 40 minutes, Jim would kill all 9 without firing a single shot. The SS guards had laughed 3 weeks earlier when they confiscated the axe during prisoner processing. A museum piece, they called it. A Viking toy. Hauptsturmfuhrer Klaus Richter mounted it on his office wall between Wehrmacht recruitment posters, a curiosity to show visiting officers. Look what the Americans bring to war. Medieval weapons. Pathetic. But Jim wasn't American by accident. His grandfather Olaf had immigrated from Norway in 1898 carrying techniques 1,000 years old. Skills most men thought belonged in museums. Skills that would save 17 American lives before sunrise. The first guard stood 42 feet away, smoking near the main gate, rifle slung casually over his shoulder. He had maybe 90 seconds to live. He didn't know it yet. Nobody expects death to come spinning through darkness at 2 1/4 rotations, blade first silent as falling snow. Jim's hands were steady. His fingers found the balance point on the ashwood handle. Muscle memory from 10,000 practice throws took over. His grandfather's voice echoed across 20 years and 4,000 miles. Feel the weight. Rotation. Release at the moment of truth. But to understand why a 22-year-old dock worker from Duluth, Minnesota, was lying in Bavarian mud preparing to commit mass murder with a medieval weapon, you need to go back. Back to before Pearl Harbor. Before the world caught fire. Back to a forge on Superior Street, where an old Norwegian blacksmith refused to let Viking techniques die. Back to the summer Jim turned 8 years old. The forge rang with thunder, sharp, metallic, a rhythm older than America itself. Jim stood in the doorway of his grandfather's shop on Superior Street, 8 years old, watching Olaf Thorson shape glowing iron into something useful. The old man was 60 then, back bent from 50 years of metalwork, hands scarred and calloused, but strong. God was he strong. When Olaf brought the hammer down, sparks exploded like tiny fireworks. The smell of coal smoke and hot metal filled the air, thick, almost choking. But Jim loved it. That smell meant grandpa, meant safety, meant learning things other boys didn't know. Summer in Duluth was hot. Inside the forge, it felt like standing next to the sun. Heat radiated from the coals in waves that made the air shimmer. Sweat ran down Olaf's face, leaving clean tracks through the soot on his cheeks. The old man noticed Jim standing there, set down his hammer, wiped his forehead with a rag that might have been white once but was now permanently gray. You gonna stand there all day, or you going to learn something? Jim stepped inside. The heat hit him like a physical force. What are you making? Grandpa Olaf lifted a piece with iron tongs, examined it against the light streaming through the doorway. An axe head, but not for chopping wood. This is for throwing. Old Viking technique. Your great-great-grandfather threw axes just like this in Norway 300 years ago. Why would anyone throw an axe? Olaf's eyes went distant, remembering things he'd seen, things he never talked about except in fragments. Because sometimes a thrown axe gets there faster than a man can run. Because sometimes you need to stop someone from 40 feet away and you don't have a gun. Because our people survived 1,000 years knowing how to use what others overlooked. He set the piece back in the forge, pumped the bellows. The coals glowed brighter, orange to yellow to white hot. You want to learn the old ways? Jim nodded, didn't fully understand what he was agreeing to. Couldn't know that 14 years later, those old ways would mean the difference between 17 men living or dying in a German prison camp. Then we start tomorrow. Summer's here, school's out. You spend every day with me. I teach you to shape metal, to read fire, to throw axes like Vikings did. That summer became the pattern. June through August, Jim spent dawn to dusk in Olaf's forge, learning metalwork first. How to read the color of heated steel. Orange meant not hot enough. Yellow meant almost ready. White meant perfect for shaping. Push it too far and the metal turned blue. Ruined. Start over. Olaf taught patience. How good tools required time. How rushing meant weakness. 3 hours of careful work created something that lasted generations. 3 minutes of hurry created junk that broke. But the real education happened in the evenings when the forge cooled. Olaf set up targets in the yard behind his shop. Pine logs stood vertical, circles painted white, 10 feet away at first, just learning to make the axe stick. The technique was specific, scientific. 1 1/4 spins for 15 feet, 2 full rotations for 25. At 40 feet, the axe completed 3 spins before the blade struck. You had to feel the weight distribution. Release at the exact moment when handle angle matched target distance. Trust the physics even when instinct said otherwise. Jim's first throws were terrible. The axe bounced off handle first, or missed entirely. His shoulders burned, his palms blistered, despite leather gloves. Again, Olaf's voice was patient but firm. Your release is too late. The axe wobbles. Feel the balance. Trust the rotation. By the end of that first summer, Jim could stick the axe from 15 feet, maybe half the time. Not great, but progress. Each summer, the distance increased. 20 feet, then 30. By age 16, Jim could hit a 6-inch target from 40 feet 9 times out of 10. The throwing had become automatic. His body knew the angles without conscious thought. Olaf watched him practice one August evening in 1938. Jim was 16. War was coming in Europe, though most Americans didn't know it yet. Olaf knew, could feel it the way old men feel storms. You're ready. For what, Grandpa? For whatever comes. Olaf's voice carried weight Jim couldn't identify yet. Our family brought these techniques from the old country. My father taught me before we immigrated. Now I've taught you. But nobody fights with axes anymore. Olaf pulled a newspaper from his pocket. Hitler annexing Austria. Tanks rolling into Vienna. The world tilting toward darkness. No place is safe forever, James. The world turns. Your father thinks I'm crazy teaching you these old ways. Maybe I am, but I've seen what war does to unprepared men. You learn this now, hope you never need it. But if you do, you'll have what your enemies don't expect. Jim didn't believe it then. Not really. This was America. Duluth, Minnesota, iron ore docks and fishing boats in Lake Superior stretching to the horizon. What did Viking axes matter here on Jim's 18th birthday, April 12, 1940? Olaf called him to the forge. Something special waited. Jim could tell by how the old man moved. Careful, deliberate. This mattered. On the workbench sat an axe unlike any Jim had seen, lighter than a battle axe. Perfectly balanced. The head was narrow with a razor edge. The handle was Minnesota ash, smooth as glass from hours of sanding. The whole thing weighed exactly 2.5 pounds. Norse runes covered the handle, ancient symbols carved deep into the wood. What do they mean? Olaf traced them with a scarred finger. This one means protection. This one courage. This one victory. These symbols are older than Christianity. Vikings carved them into weapons and ships, believing they carried power. You believe that? Olaf smiled sadly. I believe a man who thinks his weapon is blessed fights harder than one who doesn't. I believe symbols remind us who we are when everything else is chaos. I believe this axe will protect you when you need protection. Grandpa, I'm not going to war. The old man's face showed sadness Jim had never seen before. You're 18, James. War is coming whether you go to it or not. Hitler is conquering Europe. Eventually, America will choose. When that happens, boys your age will fight. Old men start wars. Young men die in them. Jim held the axe, felt the balance. Perfect. Like it had been made for his hand alone, which it had been. Olaf had spent 2 years crafting this weapon, testing and adjusting. This is yours now. Our family's skill passes to you. If America stays peaceful, let it die with you. Live a quiet life. But if war comes, if you need these old ways to protect your brothers, you use what I've taught you. Jim wrapped the axe in oilcloth, put it in his closet, went back to working the docks with his father, loading iron ore onto ships, dreaming of nothing more complicated than a fishing boat and a small house. The axe stayed wrapped and forgotten for 19 months, until December 7th, 1941, when everything changed. Michael Larson lived 2 blocks from the Thorson family, born May 7th, 1922, 25 days younger than Jim. They'd been inseparable since elementary school. Mike's father worked the same docks as Jim's father. Same shifts, same exhaustion. The boys grew up parallel, playing in streets, swimming in Lake Superior's frigid water, learning to fight in alleys where backing down meant getting your face broken. But where Jim was quiet and thoughtful, Mike was loud and reckless. Where Jim planned 3 moves ahead, Mike acted on instinct. Where Jim preferred solitude, Mike craved crowds. They balanced each other. Two halves of something that worked better together. Mike watched Jim practice axe throwing hundreds of times, tried it himself occasionally, never got the hang of it. His releases were sloppy, his rotation counts off. The axe would wobble or bounce off the target. "I don't get it," Mike said after his 10th failed throw. Age 14, summer evening behind Olaf's forge. "How do you make it look so easy? 10,000 practice throws." Jim retrieved the axe from where Mike had thrown it 3 feet left of target. "You just don't have the patience. I got patience for things that matter." Jim grinned. "And throwing axes doesn't matter." Mike shrugged. "Not in Duluth. Maybe if we were Vikings raiding England. But we're loading iron ore. Different skill set." But Mike understood something Jim didn't appreciate. Mike read history, knew about Norse explorers, about Leif Erikson reaching America 500 years before Columbus, about Viking warriors who survived by being harder and smarter than enemies. "Your grandfather is teaching you to be dangerous," Mike said one evening. Age 16. Sitting on the dock watching ore ships come in, most men learn to work. Olaf is teaching you to kill. That's dark, but true. If war comes and everyone says it will, you'll have something most soldiers don't. A weapon nobody expects. A skill nobody teaches. Your grandfather is giving you an advantage. Mike fell in love at 17, Sarah Miller. Pretty girl with auburn hair who worked at the library on Superior Street. Smart, kind, patient with Mike's recklessness. They started dating autumn 1939. By spring 1940, they were talking marriage, saving money, planning a house in the Norwegian Quarter. Children who'd grow up near the lake. Jim was going to be best man. They'd planned it over beers at the Pickwick, assumed they had all the time in the world. Sarah made them promise to be careful. "If something happens, if America gets involved, you two look out for each other." "Nothing's happening," Mike said. "But yeah, I promise, Jim and I are brothers." Jim nodded, made the same promise, meant it completely, had no idea what that promise would cost. December 7th, 1941, Sunday afternoon. Jim and Mike were at the Larson house, Mike's younger sister teaching them to dance for a church social. Neither boy was any good, but they tried. The radio played swing music. Benny Goodman, Glenn Miller, the soundtrack of an America that didn't know it was about to end. 1:38 p.m., the music stopped. An announcer's voice cut through, shaking, angry, scared. "We interrupt this program. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air. Reports indicate heavy damage to the Pacific Fleet. Casualties unknown but presumed heavy." Everyone in the Larson living room froze. Mike's mother crossed herself. His father swore. Quiet, vicious. The kind of curse that comes from deep knowledge of what this meant. Mike looked at Jim, both understanding instantly. Their plans were over. The wedding would wait. The house would wait. Everything would wait. "We're enlisting," Mike said. "Tomorrow." Sarah started crying. That night, Jim went home, opened his closet, found the oilcloth-wrapped axe. He unwrapped it, held it, tested the balance. Still perfect. The runes still visible in lamplight. Protection, courage, victory. Olaf's words came back. "If war comes, if you need these old ways to protect your brothers, you use what I've taught you." Jim didn't know this axe would kill 9 Germans in 8 minutes. Couldn't imagine lying in Bavarian mud. But he knew his grandfather had seen something coming. He rewrapped the axe, packed it at the bottom of a duffel he didn't own yet, but would need soon. Monday morning, the Army recruiting station on Superior Street had a line around the block. Every young man in Duluth trying to enlist, wanting to choose their service rather than wait for the draft. Jim and Mike waited 3 hours, finally reached the desk. A sergeant looked exhausted. "Processing volunteers since dawn. Names James Thorson, Michael Larson, ages 19. Both of us. Any medical conditions?" No, sir. The sergeant stamped papers, pushed them across. Sign here. Raise your right hand. They took the oath together, became property of the United States Army, scheduled to ship to Fort Snelling December 20th. 11 days to say goodbye. December 20th. Dawn. The train station was packed. Families seeing sons off, mothers crying, fathers standing silent with that male stoicism that says everything by saying nothing. Mike's family was there. Sarah couldn't stop crying. Held Mike like if she held tight enough, he couldn't leave. You come back to me. Sarah's voice broke. We're getting married. You promised. I'll come back. Mike believed it completely. War was adventure. They'd win by summer, home by Christmas. Olaf pulled Jim aside, away from crowds, his grip surprisingly strong. James, listen. I won't be here when you get back. Don't say that. I'm 71. I'm tired. I've taught you what I know. Whatever happens over there, you remember. The axe doesn't kill. The man holding it protects. That's what Vikings did. That's what you'll do. I'll come back. We'll throw axes together. Olaf smiled sadly. If God wills it. But if not, you remember what I taught you. Someday you teach your son. Keep the old ways alive. He handed Jim a whetstone. For keeping the axe sharp. You took it. Olaf's voice held approval. I wondered if you would. Most boys would leave it behind. But you understand. They boarded the train. Mike talking the entire journey. Making friends with every soldier. Jim sat by the window watching Minnesota pass. Farmland, small towns, snow covering everything. In his duffel carefully wrapped at the bottom, Olaf's axe waited. Fort Benning, Georgia, summer 1942. The heat was unbelievable. Humid, oppressive, like breathing through wet wool. Minnesota boys weren't built for this. Jim and Mike sweated through uniforms daily. Basic training was designed to break you down and rebuild you as a soldier. Drill sergeants screamed, pushed, made you do everything faster, harder, longer than possible. Some boys washed out, but Jim and Mike made it through. The Army didn't know what to do with Jim's axe initially. During intake, a sergeant found it. What the hell is this throwing axe, Sergeant? Family heirloom. The sergeant examined it. Tested the edge, tested the balance. This is a weapon. You know how to use it. My grandfather taught me. The man studied Jim, then handed it back. Keep it secured. Don't let officers see it. If anyone asks, it's a camping tool. Yes, Sergeant? Good. We're going to need boys who think outside doctrine. Training was brutal, but Jim and Mike excelled. Mike was natural leadership. Other soldiers followed him instinctively, trusted him. He kept morale up when everything was miserable. Jim was quieter, more focused, but reliable. He qualified expert with the M1 Garand, good with a knife, better at night operations because he'd learned to move quietly in Minnesota woods. They deployed to England August 1943. 2nd Armored Division, training for the invasion everyone knew was coming. Jim kept the axe wrapped, secured in his footlocker. At night, he'd unwrap it, feel the balance. Remember Olaf's lessons. Seemed like another lifetime. Mike noticed. You still think about that Viking stuff every day. Feels like Grandpa's with me. You think you'll ever use it? Well, hope not. But if I do, I'll be ready. June 6, 1944. Omaha Beach. 2nd Armored went in behind initial waves. Jim and Mike hit the beach around noon. The worst was over. But the scale of death was staggering. They pushed inland, through hedgerows, fighting Germans who'd had 4 years to dig in, who knew every field, every wall, every ambush point. July brought brutal combat near St. Lo. House to house, Jim used his rifle. Standard tactics, the axe stayed in his pack. No opportunity, no reason. Modern weapons worked fine, until they didn't. February 12, 1944. Reconnaissance patrol near German lines. Jim's squad. 12 men. Mike was there. Bob Jensen, former Minneapolis cop serving as squad leader. Carl Swenson, Minnesota farmer. Intelligence said the area was lightly defended. Easy recon, in and out. Intelligence was catastrophically wrong. Germans hit them from 3 sides. Machine gun fire, artillery, mortars. 4 men died in 30 seconds, 3 more in the next minute. No cover, no retreat. Surrender or die, German voices shouting in English. Bob made the call. We can't fight this. Weapons down. They threw down rifles, raised hands. German soldiers emerged. Waffen-SS, professional, efficient, dangerous. Jim had the axe in his pack, wrapped among spare socks. Germans took weapons, rifles and knives and grenades, but didn't dig deep into personal gear, didn't find the axe. That oversight would cost 9 German guards their lives. They transported prisoners by truck to Stalag Vaa Moosburg, POW camp 30 miles northeast of Munich. Processing, German efficiency, everything cataloged. Names, ranks, possessions. A sergeant going through Jim's pack found the axe, unwrapped it. Confusion. What is this family heirloom? Camping tool? The sergeant tested the balance. Called over Hauptsturmführer Klaus Richter, camp security officer. SS. 35, maybe? Educated? Perfect English. Richter examined it. Read the runes, Viking weapon. Where did you learn Viking techniques in America? My grandfather, Norwegian immigrant, blacksmith. Richter laughed. American cowboy playing Viking. Pathetic. He hung the axe on his office wall next to a captured American flag. Curiosity, conversation piece. Jim said nothing, but memorized everything. Office layout, window distance, mount height, door location, guard patterns. Some part of him was already planning. Stalag Vaa held 800 prisoners. American, British, French. Wooden barracks, thin bunks, thin blankets. Food that barely qualified as food. Turnip soup, black bread, occasionally horse meat, but it wasn't the worst camp. Guards mostly followed Geneva Convention. No torture, no executions, just imprisonment in waiting and slowly starving. Jim and Mike were in the same barracks, talked every night about home, about Duluth, about Sarah waiting, about the wedding after the war, about fishing Lake Superior. Bob Jensen was there, the cop, kept order among prisoners, settled disputes, reminded men they were soldiers, not animals. Carl Swenson was there, the farmer, quiet, stoic, could endure anything because he'd spent life enduring Minnesota winters and failed crops. They watched guards, learned patterns. Night shift was 12 men, rotated every 8 hours, walked predictable routes, checked wire every 30 minutes. Jim memorized it all, not planning yet, just observing, building mental maps, counting distances, old habits from hunting. Week 2, March 1st. Guards conducted surprise inspection, barrack search, looking for contraband. They found food in Mike's bunk, bread he'd been hoarding, not for himself, for weaker prisoners who were starving, sharing with men who'd lost hope. Richter ordered punishment, public, 20 lashes in the yard, message about obedience. All prisoners forced to watch. They stripped Mike to the waist, tied him to a post. German guard with leather strap. Jim stood in formation. Bob's hand on his arm. Quiet pressure. Warning. You help him, you both die. We need you thinking. The first lash split skin. Mike's back arched. Didn't scream. Wouldn't give them that. The 5th lash broke ribs. Mike gasped. The 10th lash drew blood running down his back. The 15th made him scream. Couldn't help it. The 18th, Mike passed out. They threw water on him, finished the count. 19, 20, cut him down. I dragged him back, threw him on his bunk like garbage. Jim sat beside Mike that night, cleaning wounds with water, wrapping with torn blankets. Mike's breathing shallow, ribs broken, maybe internal bleeding. Mike's eyes opened. Don't let me die in a truck. Voice barely audible. If there's execution orders, don't let me die like that. Let me die running free. You're not dying, promise me. Jim promised. You're not dying in a truck, I promise. That night, rage built in Jim that was cold and calculated. Viking rage, the kind that plans. The kind that waits. The kind that doesn't forget. March 13th, word came through underground network. Information always found ways despite German security. The SS had identified 17 American prisoners as intelligence assets, men who'd conducted reconnaissance, sabotage. Gestapo wanted them. Orders from Berlin. Execution. Not trial, just execution. March 15th at dawn, trucks to Munich, forest shooting, unmarked graves. Mike was on the list. His reconnaissance work, Jim was on the list. The axe confused them. They thought it indicated special training. Bob Jensen, command experience, former cop, Carl Swenson, his farm demolitions knowledge, 14 others, 17 total scheduled to die in 48 hours. March 13th evening, 5 prisoners met in the latrine, speaking in whispers. Jim explained what he'd observed, the blind spot, guard patterns, the 30-minute window, his knowledge of Richter's office, the axe on the wall. Bob shook his head. Jim, even if you get that axe, what then? Kill 9 guards silently, impossible. Not 9 at once, 1 at a time. With a thrown axe at what distance? Closest guard is 42 feet. Farthest maybe 68. I've thrown accurately at 40. 50 is harder, but possible. Bob stared. You've done this. Killed men with thrown axes targets. Pine logs. Same principle if I hit where I aim. Completely insane. Mike spoke, voice rough from broken ribs. I've watched Jim throw 10 years. If he says he can do it, he can. How do you even get into Richter's office? Jim had thought about nothing else. Administrative building has coal chute. Delivery entrance north side. Guards don't watch it. I can slip in during count. Move through basement. Second floor, southeast corner. And then you kill 9 guards. Then I kill 9 guards, or die trying. But we're dying anyway. At least this way we fight. They looked at each other. Men who'd survived D-Day, survived Normandy. Who understood sometimes impossible was the only option. Even if you get past guards, we're 40 miles behind German lines. Move fast. Southwest toward American positions. Hide during day. Move at night. If we're lucky, we might make it. Might. Bob's voice was flat. Might is a long way from will. It's might versus definitely dying in a truck Thursday morning. I'll take might. Silence. Then Bob nodded. If you can get that axe, if you take down even half the guards, rest of us rush the gate. We'll have weapons. Surprise. Mike touched Jim's arm. Brother to brother. Jim, if this works, you're going to carry this forever. 9 men, up close, with your grandfather's axe. That's not something you forget. Jim thought about Olaf's words. The axe doesn't kill. The man holding it protects. I'm not killing 9 Germans. I'm protecting 17 brothers. That's what Vikings did. They agreed to attempt escape March 14th, 24 hours before execution. Simple mathematics. Escape that night or die next morning. Jim spent March 14th memorizing final details. Every guard position, every meal distribution, every patrol change. Building mental maps that needed to be perfect. Throwing distances, calculated and recalculated. Nearest guard 42 feet, second nearest 45. Tower guard 53 feet, elevated 15. 2 outer perimeter guards 60 plus, maybe too far. Jim had never thrown accurately past 50 in practice. Tonight he'd have to try. No choice, Mike was getting weaker. The beating 2 weeks earlier had done internal damage. He coughed, blood occasionally. Moved slowly. Ribs not healing. Don't let me die in a truck, Jim, Mike's voice quiet. Let me die running if I have to die. You're not dying. Jim helped Mike sit. We're going home. You're marrying Sarah. I'm your best man. We planned this. Plans change. Just promise me. If I fall during escape, you keep going. Get the others out. Jim couldn't promise that. Mike was his brother. You fall, I carry you. That's how this works. Bob gathered the 17 condemned prisoners that evening. Assignments. Who would rush the gate? Who would grab weapons? Who would cover rear? Jim gets the axe. Jim takes down guards. We do everything else. Bob's voice was command voice. Jim buys us maybe 2 minutes of chaos. We use those 2 minutes perfectly, or we all die. Clear. Everyone understood. These were soldiers. They'd done impossible things before. At 10 p.m., Jim prepared himself mentally, visualized every throw, every distance, every angle, felt the weight of grandfather's axe in memory, trusted muscle memory from 10,000 practice throws. Olaf's voice in his head. Feel the balance. Trust the rotation. Release at the moment of truth. Somewhere in Minnesota in a cemetery, Jim had never seen Olaf lay buried. Dead 27 months. Gone before Jim could say goodbye. Before Jim could tell him the old ways mattered. That Viking techniques would save 17 American lives. But maybe Olaf knew. Maybe that's why he'd spent 2 years forging that perfect axe. Why he'd insisted on teaching skills everyone else thought were useless. Maybe Olaf had seen this moment coming across decades and oceans in the fog of time. Had prepared his grandson for a night when everything would depend on accuracy and courage and thousand-year-old knowledge. The axe doesn't kill. The man holding it protects. Jim was about to protect 17 brothers, or die trying. The mathematics were simple. 9 guards, 1 axe, 8 hours until execution. The oldest ways were about to become the deadliest ways. The day passed like years. Every minute stretched into hours. Jim memorized guard positions during morning count, afternoon count, evening distribution of the thin soup that passed for dinner. Each patrol change, each cigarette break, each predictable pattern that would matter when darkness came. The closest guard station was 42 feet from Richter's office window. Jim had paced it out mentally a dozen times, visualized the throw, 2 1/4 rotations, release angle precise. The guard would be standing, maybe smoking, presenting his profile. Perfect target if everything went right. The second nearest was 45 feet, walking the eastern fence. 2 1/2 rotations. Harder throw, more room for error, but doable if the first throw didn't raise alarm. Tower guard was 53 feet away, elevated 15 feet above ground. Difficult angle. Physics complicated by the height differential. Jim had never practiced elevated throws, would have to adjust on instinct, hope the muscle memory held. 2 outer perimeter guards patrolled 60-plus feet out, maybe 65, maybe 70, too far for guaranteed accuracy. Jim would have to get closer or use the stolen rifles. Hope chaos bought him time. He ran the numbers over and over. 9 guards. 8 would die from thrown axe if everything was perfect. 1 would require rifle fire. But perfect never happened in combat. Realistically, 6 or 7 from the axe, 2 or 3 from rifles. If he was fast, if he was lucky, if Olaf's ghost was watching. Mike sat on his bunk coughing. The broken ribs from 2 weeks ago weren't healing right. Every breath was pain, every movement careful, deliberate. He'd lost weight, cheekbones sharp, eyes sunken, but determined. Tonight we run. Mike's voice was quiet, hoarse. Tonight we're free or we're dead. Either way beats dying in a truck. Jim nodded, didn't trust himself to speak. The weight of what he was about to do pressed down like physical force. 9 men. He was going to kill 9 men with his grandfather's axe, not in the chaos of battle, not in self-defense from immediate threat, but deliberately, methodically, one after another, hunting them. The axe doesn't kill. The man holding it protects. Jim repeated Olaf's words like a prayer, like absolution for murders not yet committed. Bob Jensen gathered the 17 condemned men one final time. Late afternoon, last light fading, temperature dropping. March in Bavaria was cold. Tonight would be colder. Everyone knows their assignment. Bob's voice was cop voice, command voice. Jim creates the opening. We exploit it. Speed matters more than caution once shooting starts. We get through that gate in under 2 minutes or we die in the wire. Carl Swenson raised a hand. The Minnesota farmer, quiet man who spoke only when necessary. What if Jim doesn't make it out of the building? What if Richter's in his office? What if the door's locked? Then we die tomorrow in the trucks. Bob's answer was blunt. No backup plan, no alternative. This works or it doesn't. Jim's our only shot. The pressure of 17 lives settled on Jim's shoulders like iron weight, heavier than anything he'd carried before. Heavier than his pack on the Normandy beach. Heavier than exhaustion or fear or hunger. I'll make it work. Jim heard his own voice, sounded more confident than he felt. The axe will work. Grandpa knew what he was doing. Mike touched his shoulder. Brother to brother, you've thrown 10,000 times. Tonight's just 10 more throws. Same technique, same physics. You know this. Jim wanted to believe that, wanted to think muscle memory would override terror. That training would suppress the knowledge he was about to kill 9 men who had names and families and probably didn't want to be in Bavaria any more than Jim did. But Vikings didn't have the luxury of doubt. When you raided a foreign shore, when you protected your brothers, when survival required violence, you acted. Clean, fast, efficient. You carried the weight after, not during. Evening count came at 9 p.m. German efficiency. Prisoners lined up. Guards counted. Same routine every night. Predictable. Jim positioned himself near the latrine building, closest structure to the administrative block. When guards ordered prisoners back to barracks, Jim would slip behind the latrine, wait in the blind spot, move when the Northwest Tower guard turned to light his cigarette. 30 seconds of darkness. That's all he'd have. 30 seconds to cross 40 feet of open ground, reach the coal chute, disappear before searchlights swept back. 9:15 p.m. Guards shouted orders. Prisoners shuffled toward barracks. Doors would lock at 9:30. After that, anyone outside would be shot on sight. No warnings. Jim moved. Behind the latrine. Pressed flat against wood siding. Hard hammering. Sweat despite the cold. This was the moment. The commitment. Once he crossed that open ground, there was no going back. Searchlights swept the yard. German voices. Barracks doors slamming. Then relative quiet. Just wind. The creak of tower wood. Distant sound of guards talking. The Northwest Tower guard turned, fumbled for cigarettes. His searchlight swung away, focused on something across the compound. 30 seconds. Jim ran, low, fast, 40 feet in 18 seconds. The coal chute door was exactly where he remembered. Wooden, set into the building's stone foundation. He lifted it slowly. Hinges creaked, but the sound matched the wind. Natural, not alarming. He slipped inside. Closed the door. Complete darkness. The basement smelled like cold stone and mildew and coal dust. Jim felt his way forward, hands on walls, counting steps like Olaf had taught him. 12 steps east. Turn left. 20 steps to the stairwell. Memory map perfect. Training holding. The stairs creaked. Jim waited after each sound. Listening? Nothing. Guards didn't patrol inside at night. Why would they? Prisoners couldn't reach the building. Except tonight one had. Second floor at 11:28 p.m. Richter's office was third door on the right. Jim tested the handle. Locked as expected. He'd stolen a piece of wire, straightened it from a bunk spring, worked it into the lock mechanism. His hands were steady despite adrenaline. He'd picked locks before. Growing up in Duluth. Teenage adventures breaking into abandoned warehouses. The cylinder turned after 90 seconds. The door opened. Richter's office was dark except moonlight through the window. Cold silver light. Clear sky. Good visibility. That would help with the throws, but make him more visible once shooting started. Jim saw the axe immediately. Mounted on the wall between Wehrmacht posters. His grandfather's work. The handle worn smooth from years of practice. The blade still sharp. The runes still visible in moonlight. He lifted it off the mount. Felt the familiar weight settle into his hand like coming home. Tested the balance. Perfect. Exactly as Olaf had made it. Exactly as Jim remembered. For one moment, standing in that German officer's dark office holding his grandfather's axe, Jim felt Olaf's presence. Almost heard the old man's voice across death and distance. The axe doesn't kill. The man holding it protects. I'm protecting my brother's grandpa, just like you taught me. He moved to the window. Looked out at the compound. 9 guards visible in moonlight, 3 smoking near the main gate, 2 walking the eastern fence, 1 in the Northwest Tower, 1 checking wire near the latrine, 2 more patrolling between inner and outer perimeter. All carried rifles. Most had pistols. They walked casually. No urgency. Why worry? Prisoners were locked in barracks, half-starved, unarmed. This was just another boring night shift. Jim opened the window slowly. Cold air rushed in. Temperature maybe 28 degrees. His breath made fog. The guard's breath made fog. Visible in moonlight. Markers for aiming. 42 feet to the nearest guard. Standing by the gate. Rifle slung. Smoking. Profile presented. Couldn't ask for a better first target. Jim gripped the axe. Found the balance point. Visualized the throw exactly as 10,000 practice throws had ingrained. Distance meant 2¼ rotations. Release angle precise. Trust the physics. The guard turned sideways. Perfect profile. Jim drew back, stepped into the throw, body moving through the motion without conscious thought, muscle memory taking over. The axe left his hand at 11:47 in 23 seconds. It spun through cold night air, 2¼ rotations, moonlight catching the blade, silent except for the whisper of displaced air. 2.8 seconds flight time. The blade struck the guard's temple at 11:47 and 26 seconds, sank 3 inches into his skull. Bone cracked. The sound was quieter than Jim expected. Dull. Wet. The guard dropped without a sound, crumpled forward onto frozen ground. His rifle clattered against stone. Too loud. The second guard 45 feet away turned toward the noise, saw his companion down, started moving to investigate. Jim was already running. Down the stairs, 3 at a time, through the basement, out the coal chute, across the yard to where the first guard lay. Blood pooled around the man's head, steaming in cold air. The smell was copper and meat. The guard's eyes were open, staring at nothing, dead before his brain registered the impact. Jim pulled the axe free. One hard yank. Blade came out with a sucking sound that would haunt him for decades. Grabbed the guard's rifle. Checked the magazine. 8 rounds. Took extra ammunition from his belt. The second guard came around the corner of the administrative building. Saw the body, saw Jim standing there. Started to raise his weapon, mouth opening to shout. Jim threw. 45 feet, 2½ rotations. The axe spun through darkness. It struck the guard in the chest, just below the sternum. Drove through his rib cage into his heart. The man made a gasping sound, tried to shout but couldn't get air, lungs filling with blood. He fell backward, hit the ground hard. Jim reached him in 5 seconds, pulled the axe free, took the man's rifle and ammunition. 2 guards down, 7 remaining. No alarm yet, but the tower guard had noticed movement, was turning his searchlight toward the administrative building. Sweeping, looking for what didn't belong. Jim dropped flat, played dead next to the second guard's body. The searchlight beam passed over him, paused, moved on. But the tower guard was suspicious, called out in German. Halt. Where ist da? No response. The guard called again, louder, working the bolt on his rifle. 3 guards at the gate started moving, bringing rifles up, spreading out. They'd find the bodies in 30 seconds, would raise full alarm. Jim had no time for stealth. Stood up with a stolen rifle. Stepped out from cover, fired twice, controlled shots. Aimed, 1 gate guard went down. Another dove behind the guard shack. Third started running toward the barracks, shouting for reinforcements in German. The tower guard opened fire. Bullets struck ground near Jim's feet, kicked up frozen dirt, sparked where rounds hit stone. Jim ran for the fence, threw himself behind a drainage ditch, rolled to his knees with the axe in hand. The tower guard was 53 feet away, elevated 15 feet in his wooden tower. Difficult angle, hard throw, physics complicated by the height differential, but no choice. Jim stood, drew back, released. The axe spun 3 full rotations, rising, angling up. Terminal ballistics, fighting gravity. It struck the guard's shoulder instead of his head. Not a kill shot, buried in muscle and bone. The guard screamed, dropped his rifle, clutched at the axe handle protruding from his shoulder. Jim grabbed the second stolen rifle, aimed, fired 4 rounds, 2 hit center mass. The guard fell backward in the tower, crashed through wooden railing, landed on ground with the sound of breaking branches. Jim ran to him, retrieved the axe from his shoulder, finished him with a quick strike to the throat. 4 guards dead, 5 remaining. The 2 outer perimeter guards were running toward the compound, attracted by gunfire, 60 feet out, closing fast. The guard who'd reached the barracks was still shouting, trying to organize response. The remaining gate guard was behind cover, firing blindly. Jim counted rounds. Gate guard had fired 6 times, probably had 4 left. The 2 perimeter guards were carrying rifles. Full magazines, would be in effective range in 30 seconds. Decision time. Jim sprinted toward the main gate. Using the guard shack for cover, rifle fire tracked him. bullets snapping past his head. One round so close he felt air displacement. The gate guard leaned out to get better angle, exposed his head for 2 seconds. That was enough. Jim threw from 30 feet, 1.5 rotations. The blade split the man's skull vertically, drove down through his brain. He died instantly, fell forward across the guard shack windowsill. Jim reached him, pulled the axe free, blade slick with blood and brain matter, grabbed ammunition. The two perimeter guards were 40 feet away now, firing as they ran, not aiming carefully, just suppressing fire. Jim dropped behind the guard shack, loaded fresh magazines into both rifles, controlled his breathing, let them come. The guards advanced recklessly, thought they had him pinned. Numbers and rifles beat one man with an axe. That's what training said. When they were 30 feet away, Jim stepped out, fired both rifles simultaneously. Trigger discipline, aim shots despite chaos. One guard took 3 rounds in the chest, fell like a puppet with cut strings. The other caught 2 in the stomach, went down screaming, clutching his abdomen, trying to hold intestines in. Jim approached the stomach shot guard. The man was young, maybe 20, terrified, begging in German, eyes wide, blood pooling, steaming. For a moment, Jim saw him as a person, someone's son, maybe someone's husband, a German who'd been drafted, fighting for his country just like Jim. Then he thought about Mike beaten unconscious, about 17 men scheduled to die in trucks, about Olaf teaching him that the axe protects brothers. Jim raised the axe. The guard closed his eyes, whispered something that might have been prayer. Jim struck once. Clean. The screaming stopped. 6 guards dead, 3 remaining. The barracks guard was still shouting, but he'd stopped trying to organize. Had realized what was happening, that his friends were dying, that someone was killing them methodically. The guards started running, heading toward the commandant's quarters to raise full alarm. 40-yard head start, but Jim was faster. Driven by urgency and 3 weeks of hunger-fueled rage. He closed distance, 40 yards, 30, 20. The guard glanced back, saw Jim gaining, tried to run faster. His boots slipped on ice. He fell, scrambled up, lost 3 seconds. Fatal. Jim threw at 25 feet, 1 full rotation, close range. The axe rotated once, struck the guard between shoulder blades, severed his spine. He went down face first, slid across ice, stopped moving. 7 dead. 2 guards remaining, probably inside the commandant's building, probably already raising alarm by telephone. Jim ran to the building, kicked open the door. 2 guards inside, both scrambling for weapons. One grabbed a pistol from his belt. The other had a rifle, bringing it up, aiming at Jim's chest. Jim threw from 15 feet, 1 rotation, high velocity. The axe hit the pistol guard in the throat, crushed his windpipe, pinned him to the wall. He hung there, feet kicking, hands clawing at the handle, making horrible gurgling sounds. The last guard had his rifle up, finger on trigger, aiming center mass. Jim dove left. The rifle fired, muzzle flashed bright in darkness. The bullet passed through space where Jim had been standing half a second earlier. Punched through the wall behind, Jim rolled. Came up with one of the stolen rifles. Fired 3 times. All 3 rounds hit center mass. The guard staggered, fell, didn't move. Silence. Jim stood alone in the commandant's quarters, surrounded by 9 German corpses, holding his grandfather's blood-soaked axe. The entire engagement had lasted 8 minutes from first throw to final shot, 11:47 to 11:55. 8 minutes, 9 guards dead, 0 alarms raised successfully. His hands were shaking now. Adrenaline crash starting. His chest heaved. He'd been holding his breath without realizing. Tasted copper. Blood numb, just fear and exertion in the knowledge of what he'd just done. 9 men. He'd killed 9 men with his grandfather's axe and 2 stolen rifles. Not in the chaos of Normandy, not in the confusion of hedgerow fighting, but deliberately, hunting them, one after another. The axe doesn't kill. The man holding it protects. Jim wiped the blade on a dead guard's uniform. The blood smeared but didn't come off completely. Would never come off completely. Not really. Some stains go deeper than metal. He moved fast, back to the barracks, breaking open doors, shouting in English. Americans, on your feet. We're leaving. Now. Prisoners poured out, confused, terrified, seeing bodies scattered across the compound, seeing Jim covered in blood, holding an axe that looked like something from a nightmare or a saga. Mike found him first, grabbed his shoulders. Jim, what did you do? Exactly what I said I'd do. Jim's voice was flat, empty. We have maybe 10 minutes before someone notices the guards are gone. Get everyone to the gate. 17 condemned prisoners gathered at the main gate. The ones scheduled to die in trucks 6 hours from now. Bob Jensen took command, organized them quickly. Former cop instincts. Jim broke open the weapons locker with the axe, distributed rifles and pistols. Most of the men had combat experience, knew how to shoot. They formed defensive line while Jim worked on the gate lock. German engineering, complicated. But Jim had wire picks, had patience. After 2 minutes of manipulation, the mechanism clicked. The gate swung wide. Freedom lay beyond. Dark Bavarian forest. 40 miles of enemy territory between them and Allied lines. But alive, moving, not dying in trucks. They ran at 12:03 a.m. on March 15, 1944. The temperature had dropped to 25 degrees. None of them wore proper winter clothes. Most hadn't eaten a full meal in weeks, but they moved fast. Survival instinct overriding exhaustion. Jim led them southwest, toward American forces pushing through Bavaria. At least that was intelligence from before capture. Rumor. Hope. But southwest was the best guess. Mike struggled from the start. His broken ribs. The beating 2 weeks earlier. Internal damage that hadn't healed. He moved slower, grimaced with every breath. Jim stayed with him, half carried him when Mike stumbled, refused to leave him behind. You promised you wouldn't stop for me. Mike gasped. I lied. Jim adjusted Mike's weight. Brothers don't leave brothers. They'd covered maybe 2 miles when they heard dogs barking behind them. German pursuit, tracking dogs, soldiers, maybe 20 men, maybe more. The refugees couldn't outrun them. Exhausted, hungry, Mike barely able to walk. They had to hide or fight. Jim chose fight, defensive position at a frozen stream, narrow crossing, natural choke point. He positioned his 17 men in semicircle, told them to aim low, conserve ammunition, make every shot count. The dogs reached them first. 3 German shepherds straining against leashes, handlers 15 feet behind, visible in moonlight. Jim fired twice with stolen rifle. Both handlers dropped. The dogs stopped, confused without commands, then ran. German soldiers opened fire from tree line. Bullets tore through branches, kicked up snow. The refugees returned fire. 17 Americans who'd survived D-Day. Who knew how to fight? The firefight lasted 4 minutes. Germans lost 5 men to accurate American shooting. Professional soldiers against desperate prisoners. Prisoners were more motivated. Germans tried flanking from the east. Jim repositioned defense, kept them contained. At 1:30 a.m., Germans withdrew, either out of ammunition or unwilling to take more casualties chasing prisoners through forest at night. Jim waited 20 minutes. Then they moved again. Southwest, deeper into forest. 3 refugees were wounded. Nothing serious, but they slowed the group. Bob Jensen helped carry a man named Peterson, who'd taken a bullet in the leg. Carl Swenson supported another with a shoulder wound. Mike was getting worse, coughing blood more frequently. Ribs maybe puncturing a lung. Moving like every step was agony. Jim stayed with him. Refused to move ahead even when others urged speed. We all leave together or nobody leaves. They reached a frozen lake at 4 a.m., maybe half-mile across. Allied lines were 6 miles beyond the far shore according to Jim's best guess. The ice looked solid, but it was March. Days had been warming. Surface might not hold weight. Going around would add hours they didn't have. Dawn came at 6:30. Germans would track easily in daylight. Jim tested the ice with his boot, felt it flex but not crack. They'd have to risk it. Single file. Spread out, don't bunch up. Jim's commands were clear. If the ice breaks, lie flat. Don't panic. They crossed slowly. The ice groaned but held. Halfway across cracking sounds. Everyone stopped. Lay flat. Distributed weight. 3 minutes of absolute stillness. Ice settled. They continued. Mike fell through a weak spot, broke through up to his waist, icy water. Hypothermia would set in fast. Jim pulled him out, stripped wet clothes, gave Mike his jacket, wrapped him in everything they could spare. "We have to move fast," Jim's voice urgent. "Mike needs warmth or he dies." Everyone made it across, nobody drowned, but Mike was shaking uncontrollably, hypothermia setting in despite their efforts. The last 6 miles passed in blur, pure survival mode, exhaustion beyond description. Mike unconscious now, being carried by Jim and Bob together. Peterson barely conscious from blood loss. Carl coughing blood. Maybe pneumonia, but they kept moving. Southwest, toward freedom, toward Allied lines they prayed were where intelligence said. At 7:42 a.m. on March 15, 1944, they crossed into Allied territory. American forward position. 200 yards past German lines. American sentries saw them coming, raised weapons, then lowered them when they saw the condition. 17 men, walking wounded, hypothermic, half dead but alive. Medic, someone get a medic. American voices, beautiful sound, freedom sound. Jim collapsed against a tree, finally allowed himself to stop. Mike was unconscious beside him, still breathing, barely. All 17 prisoners survived initial escape. They transported them to field hospital, treated wounds, frostbite, hypothermia. Mike developed pneumonia but recovered after 2 weeks. Peterson's leg wound healed without infection. They spent 3 weeks in field hospital before being cleared. Jim lay in a hospital bed staring at ceiling. The axe was wrapped again in oilcloth. Clean but not clean. Would never be clean. 9 German lives stained into the metal deeper than blood. The axe doesn't kill. The man holding it protects. Jim had protected 17 brothers. Kept his promise to Mike. Honored Olaf's teaching. Used 1,000-year-old Viking techniques to save American lives. But he'd also killed 9 men. Hunted them. Struck them down one after another with his grandfather's axe. That weight would never lift. That knowledge would never fade. Some nights Jim woke screaming. Seeing the young German guard begging. Seeing the tower guard falling. Seeing blood on moonlit snow. Mike would be there, hand on Jim's shoulder. "You saved 17 lives. We wouldn't be here without you." But Jim also took 9. That was the equation. 9 deaths enabling 17 survivals. Was it worth it? The nightmare said no. The 17 men walking around said yes. Jim didn't know which answer was right. Maybe both. Maybe neither. Maybe that's what war did. Created situations where right and wrong blurred into gray, and all you could do was protect your brothers and carry the weight after. The axe lay wrapped in oilcloth, waiting. Jim would carry it home. Would keep it the rest of his life. Would never throw it again except in nightmares. But he'd also never forget what Olaf taught him, that sometimes the oldest ways are the deadliest ways. That Viking techniques could save lives in 1944 Bavaria. That a grandfather's love could reach across death and distance to protect his grandson when it mattered most. 9 guards dead, 17 prisoners free. And all because an old Norwegian blacksmith refused to let ancient skills die. That was legacy. That was meaning. That was worth carrying the weight. The field hospital at Regensburg smelled like disinfectant and death. Clean death. Medical death. Not the raw copper smell of blood on frozen ground. Not the sweet rot of bodies left too long. But death nonetheless. Jim lay in a white bed staring at a white ceiling. 3 weeks since the escape. 3 weeks of doctors and questions and men in uniforms who didn't believe what 17 prisoners kept saying. Mike was 2 beds over, still recovering from pneumonia. The hypothermia from the frozen lake had nearly killed him. Lungs filled with fluid, temperature dropped so low doctors said he shouldn't have survived. But he did. Stubborn Minnesota bastard refused to die through everything they'd been through. "You awake?" Mike's voice was rough, damaged, would never sound quite right again. "Yeah." Still having the dreams, Jim didn't answer. Didn't need to. Mike knew. They all knew. 17 men who'd escaped together. They all had dreams. But Jim's were different. Jim's featured faces, the young German guard begging, the tower guard falling, blood steaming on frozen ground. The British intelligence officer arrived on April 15th, Captain something. Jim didn't catch the name, didn't care. The man had a folder thick with papers, typed reports, witness statements, Private Thorson. The officer sat beside Jim's bed. I need you to walk me through the escape again, every detail. Particularly the 9 guards. Jim had told this story 6 times already. To American intelligence, to British intelligence, to a French liaison officer who spoke terrible English. Each time they looked at him like he was lying, or crazy, or both. I've already explained it. Explain it again. The officer's voice was patient but firm. 9 German sentries killed with throwing axe. You understand why this requires verification. So Jim told it again. The coal chute, Richter's office, the window, 42 feet to the first guard, 2 1/4 rotations, temple strike, the second guard at 45 feet, chest strike, the tower guard at 53 feet elevated 15, shoulder hit first, had to finish with rifle. All 9 guards, all the distances, all the physics. Same story he'd told 6 times before because it was true and truth doesn't change no matter how many times you tell it. The officer made notes. Where did you learn to throw an axe with this level of accuracy, my grandfather? Norwegian immigrant, blacksmith in Duluth, Minnesota. He taught me from age 8 to 18, 10 years of practice, 10,000 throws. And you truly believe you killed 9 trained soldiers with this technique? I don't believe it. Jim's voice was flat. I know it. I was there. So were 16 other men who'll tell you the same thing. The officer interviewed all 17 survivors separately, compared statements, looked for inconsistencies, found none. Every man confirmed Jim's account. The guards died exactly as Jim described. The distances matched. The timeline matched. The physics worked. German records from Stalag Valley supported it. 9 centuries unaccounted for on March 15th. Investigation ongoing. Bodies found with bladed weapon trauma. No explanation how a prisoner acquired such a weapon or developed the skill. The British wrote their report April 28th, documented everything. Recommended Jim for America's highest military decoration, the Medal of Honor, for extraordinary valor, for tactical ingenuity, for devotion to fellow soldiers. The ceremony happened June 7, 1944, temporary Allied headquarters in England. Day after D-Day, the second invasion, the big push that would end the war, or so everyone hoped. General Dwight D. Eisenhower stood before assembled soldiers, rows of men in dress uniform, medals being awarded, recognition for valor. Jim stood at attention, still thin from captivity, but recovered, healthy, alive. Eisenhower read the citation. His voice carried across the assembly. Private First Class James Thorson, on the night of March 14th through 15th, 1944, single-handedly neutralized 9 enemy combatants using an improvised weapon, leading to successful escape of 17 American prisoners. His actions demonstrate extraordinary valor, tactical ingenuity, devotion to fellow soldiers. Eisenhower pinned the Medal of Honor to Jim's chest. The star hung heavy, heavier than it should be, like it carried the weight of 9 German lives. The general shook Jim's hand, looked him in the eye. Son, what you did was remarkable. How did you learn to throw an axe like that? My grandfather taught me, sir. Norwegian immigrant. Kept the old Viking techniques alive. Eisenhower smiled. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. You saved 17 men. Carry that with pride. The other 16 survivors attended, all in uniform, standing at attention. Mike was there, still using a cane, lungs still damaged, but alive. Several men were crying, not ashamed, just overwhelmed by the weight of what they'd survived. After the ceremony, Mike approached, pulled Jim into an embrace. You saved my life. Would have died in that truck, or from pneumonia, or frozen in that lake. You carried me. Your grandfather taught me to protect my brothers. Jim's voice was quiet. I was just doing what Olaf would have done. They returned to their unit July 1944, 2nd Armored Division pushing through France, fighting toward Germany. The war was turning. Everyone could feel it. Allied momentum building. German resistance crumbling. Maybe home by Christmas after all. But first they had to finish it. They fought through summer, through fall, into winter. December brought the Battle of the Bulge. German counteroffensive. Desperate last attempt. Jim and Mike's unit was there, fighting in snow and cold that reminded Jim of the escape 9 months earlier. But this time they had proper gear. Hot food, ammunition, support, not running for their lives, just doing their jobs. Mike's lungs struggled in the cold. He coughed constantly, couldn't keep up on long marches, but refused medical discharge, stayed with his unit, stayed with Jim. May 8th, 1945. Victory in Europe. Germany surrendered. The war everyone thought would last forever was suddenly over. Soldiers celebrated, drank, kissed nurses, sang, acted like men who'd just been given their lives back. Jim sat alone, thought about the 9 Germans, about whether they'd live to see surrender. Probably not. He'd killed them 13 months earlier. They'd been dead while the war ground on, while other men fought and died, while the world kept turning. Sometimes Jim wondered about their families, whether wives got letters, whether children asked when Papa was coming home, whether anyone knew what happened to the 9 guards who disappeared from Stalag VEA on a cold March night. They shipped home August 1945. Troop transport from France to New York. Train from New York to Minnesota. 3 years since they'd left. Felt like 3 lifetimes. Mike's family met them at the station. Sarah ran to Mike, hugged him like she'd never let go. 3 years of letters. 3 years of fear. 3 years of waiting. Over. Done. He'd kept his promise. Came home. Jim's father Thomas was there, looking older, grayer, more worn, but alive. He embraced Jim, held him. Neither man spoke for a long moment. Where's Grandpa Jim looked past his father, searching for Olaf, for the old man who'd taught him everything that mattered. Thomas's face went still. Son, your grandfather passed away. December 42, I wrote you. Multiple letters, none reached you. The world tilted. Jim felt like he'd been hit in the chest. Olaf dead. 2.5 years, while Jim was in camps and combat, while Jim was using everything Olaf taught to stay alive. How heart failure. Thomas's hand on Jim's shoulder. He was 72. It was peaceful in his sleep. He lived long enough to hear about Pearl Harbor, to know you'd enlisted. He was proud. Jim couldn't speak, couldn't process. The man who'd shaped him, taught him, given him skills that saved 17 lives. Dead for 2.5 years and Jim hadn't known. The forge on Superior Street was locked. Abandoned, windows dusty. Thomas explained customers had died or moved away. Nobody needed traditional blacksmith work. The forge closed after Olaf's death. Thomas gave Jim the key. Inside, everything was exactly as Jim remembered. Anvil, tools, cold forge, dust covering everything like snow. On the workbench, Thomas had placed items saved for Jim. Olaf's journals, his hammers, and a letter, addressed to James Thorson, grandson, written in Olaf's careful script. Jim sat on the old stool, the one he'd sat on as a child watching Olaf work. Opened the letter with shaking hands. My dear James, if you are reading this, I am gone and you have returned. I pray it is so. I pray you survived whatever this war brought. I taught you the old ways, Viking techniques, skills most men think belong in museums. Perhaps they do. Perhaps I was foolish teaching you methods from 1,000 years ago. But I believe in my bones these skills saved you somehow, protected you when modern weapons could not. Our people survived 1,000 years because we knew how to adapt, how to use what others overlooked, how to think like Vikings even in a modern world. The axe I forged carries our family's spirit. My father taught me. His father taught him. Back through generations to the old country, now I have taught you. Whether you pass this knowledge to your children is your choice. If America stays peaceful, let the skill die with you. Live a quiet life. But if your sons ask to learn, if your grandchildren show interest, remember, these skills are not for killing, they are for protecting. That is what Vikings understood. That is what I tried to teach you. I am proud of you, James. Whatever happens in this war, whatever you must do to survive and protect your brothers, I am proud. The axe does not kill. The man holding it protects. You will understand this by the time you read this letter. Your grandfather always Olaf Thorson. Jim read it 3 times, tears streaming down his face. First time he'd cried since the war started. Since before capture. Since before killing 9 men with the axe Olaf forged. The axe does not kill. The man holding it protects. Olaf had known, somehow known Jim would need those skills, would use them to protect brothers, would carry the weight of protection forever. Jim stayed in the forge until dark, holding Olaf's letter, surrounded by tools and memories, processing everything, the war, the escape, the 9 Germans, Olaf's death, the weight of it all. Thomas found him there, sat beside him, waited. I killed 9 men with the axe he made me, Jim finally said. Threw it like he taught me. Used everything he showed me. To kill, to protect. Thomas corrected gently. You protected 17 brothers. That's what Olaf wanted. That's what the skills were for. I see their faces. The Germans, young kids, fathers. One begged. I killed him anyway. Because 17 Americans would have died if you didn't. War makes us do terrible things, but you did them for the right reasons. Grandpa would understand. Jim wasn't sure. Wasn't sure about anything except the world had changed and he'd changed with it and nothing would ever be simple again. He tried to return to normal life. Worked the docks like his father. Loading ore ships. Same job he'd had before the war. As if 3 years of combat and captivity had been a dream. But it wasn't normal. Couldn't be. Nightmares came 3 or 4 times a week. Same dream. Throwing the axe in endless darkness. Blade striking flesh. The sound, the resistance. The young guard begging. He'd wake screaming. Covered in sweat. Heart pounding. Mike and Sarah lived with Jim's family temporarily while saving for their own house. Sarah would hear Jim's screams through the wall. Would wake Mike. Mike understood. Had his own nightmares. Different but equally real. They didn't talk about it much. Men in the 1940s didn't. You survived. You moved on. You worked. That was the expectation. Mike and Sarah married September 19th, 45. Big wedding at First Lutheran Church. Both families. Many of the 17 survivors traveled to Duluth. Reunion and celebration. Jim was best man as planned. Stood beside Mike at the altar. Handed him the ring. Made a short toast at the reception about brotherhood and promises kept. Bob Jensen attended. Back on Minneapolis police force. Told stories about the escape. About Jim killing 9 guards. About how they all survived because one man remembered old skills. Carl Swenson came from his farm. Brought his family. 3 kids. Said they existed because Jim threw an axe accurately. All 17 survivors were there. Or sent letters if they couldn't attend. Each one crediting Jim with survival. Each one grateful. Jim accepted thanks awkwardly. Felt like he didn't deserve it. Felt like he'd just done what Olaf trained him to do. Nothing heroic, just skill and necessity. March 15th, 1946. First anniversary of the escape. Mike organized a reunion, called all 17 survivors. Most could attend. Gathered in Duluth, VFW Hall. They met awkwardly at first. Men who'd shared the most intense experience of their lives but hadn't processed it together. Hadn't talked about it. Bob spoke first. We're here because one man learned a skill his grandfather taught him. Because Jim Thorson killed 9 Germans with a throwing axe none of us believed would work. It worked. Carl's voice was quiet. We're here because it worked. They drank, told stories, some funny, some dark, some they'd never tell their families. Things only they would understand. Jim was quiet most of the night. Mike noticed. Pulled him aside. You okay? I killed 9 men, Mike. With my grandfather's axe. Sometimes I dream about it. Their faces, the young one who begged. Mike's response was firm. You saved 17. We wouldn't be here without you. My kids wouldn't exist without you. Sarah and I are trying for a baby. That child will exist because you threw an axe accurately. Jim nodded. Couldn't quite accept it, but appreciated Mike saying it. The reunion became annual tradition. Every March 15th, sometimes in Duluth, sometimes Minneapolis, sometimes other cities where survivors lived, but always together, always remembering. March 15th, 1955. 10th anniversary. Different this time. The 17 survivors brought families. Mike had 2 kids by then. Boy age 4, girl age 2. Sarah was pregnant with their third. Bob Jensen had 3 children. Carl Swenson had 4. Others had kids ranging from infant to 8 years old. 23 children total, all existing because 17 men survived March 14th through 15th, 1944. Jim sat watching the kids play, doing math in his head. These children existed because he'd killed 9 Germans. That was the equation, 9 deaths enabling 23 births so far. More coming. Was it worth it? The nightmares, the guilt, the weight. Mike's son approached. Uncle Jim, Dad says you're a hero. What did you do? Jim looked at Mike. Mike nodded. Tell him, I protected your father. Jim chose words carefully. When bad men wanted to hurt him, I stopped them. That's what heroes do. They protect people they love. Did you fight them? Yes. Did you win? We're here, aren't we? That means we won. The boy hugged Jim. Thank you for protecting my dad. Jim hugged back. First time the equation felt balanced. 9 deaths, 23 children, and this boy's gratitude. Maybe it was enough. March 15th, 1972, 27th anniversary. The 17 survivors were 50 years old now, graying, thicker around the middle, but alive. And they brought grandchildren, 47 grandchildren total. Mike alone had 6. His children had married, started families, multiplied. Jim never married, never had children of his own. He'd tried, dated women, but the nightmares scared them off, the dark moods, the inability to open up. Eventually he stopped trying, but he had 47 nieces and nephews through the 17 brothers, 47 children who called him Uncle Jim, who knew he was a hero even if he didn't feel like one. Mike's oldest granddaughter approached, age 8, precocious. Uncle Jim and Grandpa, Mike says you saved his life with an owl. Like a Viking, something like that. Can you teach me? Jim looked at Mike. Mike shrugged. Your choice. Jim thought about Olaf, about passing skills to the next generation, about whether Viking techniques belonged in 1972. I can teach you, if your parents say it's okay, but you have to understand, axes are not toys, they're tools. Tools can protect or destroy depending on who holds them. I understand. Her voice was solemn. Jim taught her that summer. Her and 3 other grandchildren set up targets behind what was now Jim's forge. Olaf's forge he had reopened, not as a business, just as a place to keep old ways alive. He taught them distances, rotation counts, release timing. Everything Olaf had taught him, but he also taught philosophy. The axe doesn't kill. The man holding it protects. You learn this hoping you never need it, but if you do, you use it to protect people you love. June 1984. Mike got sick that spring, lung cancer. Doctors said it was from the pneumonia in 44. Lung damage that never fully healed. 40 years of gradual deterioration. Jim visited him in the hospital. Mike looked small in the bed, nothing like the strong young man who'd survived beatings in frozen lakes and 12 miles through enemy territory. We had a good run. Mike's voice was weak. 40 years I wasn't supposed to have. 3 kids, 6 grandchildren. All because you threw an axe in the dark. Jim held his hand. You were worth protecting, brother. Sarah still loves me. Mike smiled. We had 40 years of marriage. That's more than most people get. That's because of you. That's because you were strong enough to keep walking with broken ribs. They sat in comfortable silence. Brothers who'd survived hell together, who'd built lives afterward, who'd kept promises made at train stations 43 years earlier. Mike died July 8th. Pneumonia complicated by cancer, lungs finally gave out, but he died surrounded by family, children, grandchildren, 89 descendants in the room or nearby, legacy beyond measure. September 14th, 1984, Jim was working on his boat, maintenance before winter, engine repair, something he'd done 1,000 times, massive heart attack, quick. He was dead before he hit the deck. 62 years old, the funeral at First Lutheran drew 300 people, all 17 survivors who were still alive, 12 of them. 5 had died over the years. Their families came representing them, and the descendants, 89 people who existed because of March 14th through 15th, 1944. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. 3 generations. Bob Jensen delivered the eulogy, retired Minneapolis police chief. 72 years old, but voice still strong. Jim Thorson saved 17 men with his grandfather's Viking axe. But he really saved hundreds. Everyone in this room exists because Jim remembered skills his grandfather taught him, because he had courage to use those skills when it mattered most. Jim never married, never had children of his own, but he has 89 children through us, 89 descendants who carry his legacy, who exist because one man from Duluth learned to throw an axe accurately in the dark. Some of you are too young to understand what happened that night in March 44. Let me tell you, Jim infiltrated a German prison camp alone, retrieved his grandfather's axe from an enemy officer's wall, killed 9 armed guards without raising an alarm, then led 17 of us to freedom across 40 miles of enemy territory in winter. The military gave him the Medal of Honor. General Eisenhower himself pinned it on. But the real medal is in this room. 89 lives that wouldn't exist if Jim had failed. 89 people who carry his legacy forward. Jim carried weight the rest of his life. Nightmares about the 9 men he killed. Guilt about violence necessary for protection. That weight never lifted. But he bore it so we could live, so our children could be born, so our grandchildren could grow up free. That's what heroes do. They carry weight so others don't have to. Bob's voice broke. He was crying now. Not ashamed, just overwhelmed. Jim was my brother. All 17 of us were brothers. We lived because he was willing to do what we couldn't. Kill 9 men to save 17. That math seems simple, but the weight of it isn't simple at all. Jim understood that. Carried that weight 40 years. Never complained, never sought glory, just lived quietly. Worked his boat, taught grandchildren to throw axes, kept old ways alive. They buried Jim with military honors, honor guard, flag folding ceremony, 21-gun salute, Medal of Honor displayed prominently, and they buried him with Olaf's axe, the one that had killed 9 men and saved 17. Jim had requested it, wanted to return to Olaf with the tool Olaf had made. Sarah spoke briefly, Mike's widow, tears streaming. Mike told me Jim saved his life. I got 40 years of marriage because of that. My children exist because of that. My grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. Jim gave our family everything. We can never repay that debt, but we can remember. Tell our children. Tell their children. Jim Thorson's story doesn't end today. It continues through every life he saved, through every descendant who exists because of him. German records captured after the war confirmed everything. 9 sentries killed March 14th through 15th, 1944, at Stalag Auschwitz. Method of death initially listed as unknown bladed weapon. Subsequent investigation determined thrown axe or hatchet. Germans never understood how a prisoner acquired such a weapon or developed the skill to kill trained soldiers from 40-plus feet. Wehrmacht security protocols at all POW camps were changed. Increased guard numbers, added searchlights, reinforced fences, but they couldn't stop prisoners from telling the story. Word spread through camp systems, then through occupied Europe. The resistance used it for morale. One American with an axe had killed 9 Germans and freed 17 prisoners. Proof that individual courage could defeat superior numbers. Modern military historians debate whether the feat was possible. Throwing axe experts note 50 feet is near maximum effective range for accuracy. Olympic throwers rarely exceed 40 feet in competition. But Jim wasn't competing. He was killing. And he'd practiced 10 years under Olaf's instruction. The mechanics were sound. Physics worked. Witnesses confirmed it. German death reports documented 9 guards dead by bladed trauma in 8 minutes. Jim's Medal of Honor is displayed at the Minnesota Military Museum. Beside it is Olaf's throwing axe, the weapon that saved 17 lives. Visitors can see the runes Olaf inscribed, the wear on the handle from years of practice, the perfectly balanced weight, the craftsmanship that kept Viking techniques alive in 20th century Minnesota. A plaque explains the story, but the real legacy isn't in museums, it's in the descendants. 112 people alive today who trace existence back to March 14th through 15th, 1944. Back to one man with his grandfather's axe, Three of Mike's great-grandchildren learned axe throwing. One competed nationally, won championships, used techniques unchanged for 1,000 years. From Vikings to Olaf to Jim to modern competition, they tell Jim's story about protecting brothers, about old skills saving lives, about the axe that doesn't kill but protects those who hold it right. Jim Thorson never became famous outside military history circles. Most Americans don't know his name, but the 89 descendants who gathered for his funeral knew. The 17 men he saved knew. And somewhere in whatever place Norwegian immigrants and their grandsons go after death, Olaf knows. The old skills mattered. Viking ways survived. The axe protected when it needed to protect. That was always enough. That was always the point. Not glory, not recognition, just protecting brothers. When protecting brothers mattered most. Jim understood that. Olaf had taught him. And in the end, that teaching saved 17 lives and created 112 descendants and proved that sometimes the oldest ways are the deadliest ways and the best ways. The axe lies in a museum now, behind glass, safe, the runes still visible, protection, courage, victory, words carved by an old Norwegian blacksmith who refused to let ancient knowledge die. Beside it hangs Jim's Medal of Honor, blue ribbon, bronze star, recognition from a grateful nation. But the real recognition is walking around, living, breathing. 112 people who exist because a 22-year-old from Duluth remembered what his grandfather taught him, who trusted muscle memory in darkness, who threw with accuracy that saved brothers. 9 guards died, 17 prisoners lived. 112 descendants exist. That's the equation. That's the legacy. That's what matters. The axe doesn't kill. The man holding it protects. Jim Thorson protected his brothers. That's what Vikings did. That's what heroes do. That's what grandfathers teach grandsons in forges on Superior Street. When the world isn't watching, sometimes the old ways are the only ways that work. Sometimes ancient skills matter more than modern training. Sometimes 1,000 years of knowledge compressed into one perfect axe throw saves more lives than all the technology and tactics and doctrine combined. Jim knew that. Olaf knew that. The 17 survivors knew that. The 112 descendants know that. Remember his name, James Thorson, Private First Class, United States Army, Medal of Honor recipient, Viking's grandson, brother's protector, hero who never wanted to be called hero. He saved 17 men with his grandfather's axe, but really he saved hundreds. All the children, all the grandchildren, all the great-grandchildren, all the lives that flow forward from that frozen March night when one man remembered what his grandfather taught him. That's legacy. That's meaning. That's worth remembering. The oldest ways, the deadliest ways, the best ways, Viking ways.